Hello and happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome in.
How many webinars have we done together?
How many have we done together?
What would you guess if we went back and tallied them up? How many webinars?
I'm going to say 15. That's my guess. I bet you we have a team member that could figure it out.
My guess is 20.
20 higher. Well, it depends. What all counts? Like some of the trainings, just webinars?
It's webinars.
Just webinars.
I bet we're close to 20.
Yeah, somewhere.
Hello, Megan.
Megan person and Cherie.
We know where you two are from. Where's everybody else from? If you can, name drop. Yeah, where are you at in this world? And anything else you want to add, as long as it's responsible to add. Missouri. I have family from Missouri.
I always love seeing that, Sarah, Snohomish, because I can actually say it now. If you would have asked me like 18 months ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to say it. Minnesota is represented. Tammy, I don't know how to say that place in California. Do you know that one, Clay?
Petaluma, yes, I do know.
Petaluma?
I've been there many times. Far away from Joplin. Not a good thing, probably. I don't know. Oh,
Amy.
Rubbing it in. Just anytime you just say where you live, it kind of is like a dig at other people.
I live in Hawaii.
Yeah, that's where I live. I live in
But we
Hawaii.
could cheer for Carol and St. Paul. I mean, we could cheer for, those Minnesotans.
Best city in the country.
Hawaii just sounds much better to us right now, right? Since it's still winter, nearly in April. So, all right, we're gonna start. What do you think, Clay? Should we start?
Well, I guess that's why we're here. So yes.
We should probably do a webinar. Right as it's 90 in Florida. Thanks for that. That's going to give us some motivation to start this webinar out with a smile. Well, welcome in everybody. I'm Megan Gruss, Executive Director of Implementation here at Character Strong, joined by Clayton Cook.
How's it going, everybody? Glad to have you here to dig into a topic that Megan and I are super passionate about, understanding Tier 2. Obviously, the title here, it's not just an intervention, it's actually a process. So we're excited to be able to explore this topic with you today.
Yeah. And as you've already done, check in. We're also going to do a second one. This comes from our curricula, our Tier 2 curricula, and this is a K2 get to know you activity. So we're going to choose a crayon color, answer the question that comes up related to that color in the chat. So Clay, you want to pick a color?
Purple.
Purple. Here we go. All right. What do you think of when thinking about the color purple? This is a good K2 get to know you. You can definitely tell it's K2. Clay, purple.
Oh, UW Huskies. I wasn't going there. I was thinking eggplant first, then I went to like Minnesota Vikings. How about you?
One of those, yes. How about me? My head immediately goes to Purple Rain, Minnesotan Prince. Yeah, Doris is in my camp as well. Oh, that's great. Oh, we got some real good examples. We got more Prince, some beverages of choice. Oh, your high school color. There we go. What a fun way to make connections with other people and just get us connected, even though we are virtual. So we're going to dig in today into our webinar. What can you expect? Before we start, just know that the webinar is recorded and you're in listen only mode. The links and resources are going to be shared for you in the chat today. And you can certainly use the Q&A or chat feature if you have questions throughout our time together. And we love for you to be engaged in the chat and ask any questions at any time. We'll be sure to answer those. Our content for today, during the webinar, we're going to get to clarity around what drives Tier 2 success, knowing that it is a true process, a problem-solving process that makes this work come to life. And so then we'll dig into our 5-step process, and we'll wrap up talking about you can't make a process happen without a team of people dedicated to the work. And then once we close out today, we'll send you the slides in PDF format. You'll also get the recording so you can watch that, share it with your colleagues as needed, and then we're going to encourage you to get the support you need. And so I think the first question that we need to start with is, well, I don't know, what kind of support do I actually need around Tier 2? So we're going to launch a poll for you here. You're just going to answer, do I have a clear Tier 2 process? I'm just here for some tune-ups and tips. Maybe it's a scattershot approach to the Tier 2 process and you could use some help organizing it. Or maybe you're a 3 and you're struggling to implement a coordinated Tier 2 process and need some support. So grab that poll. It should have just popped up for you there. And we'd love to hear just the needs of our audience today. What's your guess, Clay? Where's the land?
Yeah, I would imagine, people are in a space trying to get it right. So either it's scattershot or struggling. Yeah, it often is a complicated process to figure out how are we going to coordinate and bring it all together to follow through with really high quality supports for students who have needs in addition to Tier 1. So that's my guess.
That's just your guess.
No.
Not just 1, 2, or 3. It is very strategic. We are going to. All right, I'm going to end that poll for you. We're going to launch those results at the end when we talk about your action steps going from here. So Clay, what's the opposite of problem solving?
Yeah, I would love for people to just explore and share what your thoughts are here. What's the opposite of problem solving? And we'll dig into this concept in a second, because it turns out one way to think about Tier 2 in general, that it is a problem-solving process. What's the opposite that we want to avoid? Admiring the problem. There we go. And it turns out that adults in kids' lives can spend a lot of time, admiring the problem when it comes to solving issues that students are struggling with. Because if we're not problem solving, then what are we actually doing? And so we need to think about not only problem solving, but from a lens of a process that we can follow to ensure that we're problem solving at each phase of conversations we have around students who require Tier 2 support. So what are the Tier 2 supports? We kind of want to get this out of the way. We squeeze this image in every time we have a Tier 2 webinar, demo, presentation. So there it is.
And you know what?
Avoid it.
The ironic part about this is, Clay, I'm not sure if in our time together we've actually ever ate ice cream.
Yeah, one of these days we should just pull out ice cream and figure out what our Tier 2 support is, because we know that Tier 2 is about layering on us support in addition to Tier 1. It's not in replacement of Tier 1, but what are those supports we're layering on in addition to Tier 1? Number 1, Tier 2 is inclusive of individual and group-based interventions. We often hear, well, it's only small group interventions. That's not the case when we're talking about social, emotional, and behavioral supports. There's individual supports we can be provided. What qualifies those supports are really interventions that don't require a bunch of specialty training. You don't have to have a certain credential that gives you permission to do it or not do it. And so it's really things that don't require a ton of training. They're pretty straightforward. And they're often supports, though, that are informed by data. And the data that informs the selection of a precise intervention are what we call root cause analysis data. We're developing hypotheses regarding what we think is the reason why the student's need exists. And then we're selecting from among a menu a very precise supports. That's why often Tier 2 is called targeted support. We're targeting a root cause versus Tier 1. We don't have the data. We're often not as precise at addressing root causes that explain why students are struggling. And that's why some students need Tier 2. So what does a successful Tier 2 system of support look like? Tier 2 isn't just an intervention. It's really a system of support. What does a successful tier 2 system of support look like? If you can in the chat, just share some thoughts that immediately come to mind. That if we went in and we observed what's happening in a school, and we saw people coming together to problem solve, what would we see people doing? What would it look and sound like for a really high quality tier 2 system of support that's up and running in a school? Ooh, I like the idea of collaboration, consistency here. I see people are using data. They're not just staring at each other, using their opinions, but they have actionable information at their fingertips. Yeah, measuring things. There's going to be tiered levels of supports, things that are practical. Yeah, what does it look like? Because if it's impractical, we're not going to be able to follow through. It's going to be too cumbersome and burdensome for schools to actually follow through with. Ooh, I like the idea of exit and entry criteria. We call those decision rules. There's clear decision rules you can see people using and applying to figure out which students actually need tier 2, which students are we actually going to push back and lean back into tier 1. I love all these ideas. Now we have kind of what it looks like. The next step is, how do we actually start to pull it all together? Because it turns out there's lots of dots we have to connect in order to get tier 2 right. And these are just some of the dots. Yeah, we're going to have to develop a plan and actually implement the plan with fidelity and have data that communicates the student's response to the intervention. We're also going to have to go to the bottom right. We're going to have some part of the process that we need to connect is define what is the student's need. Very precisely, what's the student's need? Beyond that, we're going to probably need to figure out what's the root cause that explains why that need exists. Before all of that, we're probably going to need some type of screening data or other proactive detection data to activate early intervention, because early intervention doesn't happen if we don't have things like universal screening or proactive detection methods. So you get a sense that these are all the dots we have to connect. And that's where the idea of tier 2 as a process and as a system of coordinated actions comes into play. So what is a process? If you're going to come up with a quick and dirty definition of a process, what is a process? And then maybe even an additive wrinkle to that is like, why do we need a process to guide tier 2? So if you can, and yeah, what is a process?
I love the checkpoints, Darcy. Like, yeah, it's great to start, but we have to have checkpoints along the way.
Ooh, sequence of events. And if you add to what Shelley said there, clearly defined sequence of events, or take what Nicole's saying around steps. Yeah, it's a sequence of steps and actions we're going to take that are very clearly defined. And they're intentional. I like that, Becky, because we know we have a purpose and we're going to follow a process that produces an outcome. Because if you start to look on this next slide, what is the definition of a process? It is a series of steps that we try to follow and adhere to achieve certain results. We're really clear about the outcomes we want to produce. Now we got to figure out what are the steps that enable us to actually achieve those outcomes. And that's what we need to follow. So a tier 2 problem solving process could be defined in this way. It's a series of steps that are followed to put in place precise intervention to achieve one. These are the outcomes, the results we want. We want a return on the time and energy educators invest in students, because for a smaller subset of students, educators dedicate quite a bit of time. And ultimately, the results we want are improved outcomes for students who have needs in addition to tier 1. So we got to figure out, okay, we need a problem solving process, and that's spells out the series of steps that we need to follow. As Nicole, you're mentioning here, that are replicable, that enable us to put in place the most likely, precise, and effective support so we can achieve the types of results we want.
So here we are. What's driving successful tier 2? We know that we like checklists to be able to make sure that we're doing the work we need to be doing. We have to have that problem solving process to coordinate it. If you've been to any of our webinars, you've seen this. This is our 5-step problem solving process. We have to start over there on the left by really figuring out what's working and not working at tier 1. And we're trying to collect our data from tier 1 practices to say what students are successful, which ones might need some additional support. And then we move along that line really into that tier 2 world and into that process. So it's important that we have a plan. What is it from beginning to end, and how are we coordinating that so that we can replicate it and track it over time? So that drives it. So to start the process, then we got to go straight down to number 2. It's the proactive detection that starts this process. And that it's kind of a weird spot, because proactive detection is like, well, is that tier 1 work? Is it really tier 2 work? What we know is we have to do that work in order to do tier 2 well. So we think about those decision rules that we have to create in order to activate tier 2 so that we can really lean into early intervention. That's the goal. We need to early intervene as the first part of our process so that we can guarantee we're servicing the most appropriate students as right as we possibly can. So step 1 in our language is detect and triage. That's our goal. We're going to detect the students who have the highest level of need. And then from that list, we're ultimately going to decide what are we going to do? Who needs the most care and who has been detected but may not need as much care, and we can just support them with additional dosage of tier 1 support. So let's think about that early intervention piece and really tier 2 in your system, because we know tier 2 is about early intervention. We're not waiting for students to fail, but we're intervening early while we still can, and we can help that student be as successful as early on as possible. So think about it in your system. How do students go from tier 1 to tier 2? Do we just like jump in a boat and keep going? How do we get there in a strategic way? Any examples that you like to lean into, Clay?
Yeah, I think there's different methods. There's no one route to, early intervention. There's different methods and information we can use. We know that some of the most robust ways we can do this is through universal screening. And you think about this, like, for anything you would want to detect early, not just an academic need, a social, emotional, behavioral health need in schools, but think about any need, a physical need. How do you activate early, timely intervention to treat and address whatever the need is? You need to be able to screen and detect. And a lot of people in schools don't necessarily understand the connection. They believe in early intervention on one hand, but they aren't making the connection that early intervention doesn't happen unless we have methods like universal screening, because essentially we're trying to prevent students from falling through the cracks.
Yeah, and you mentioned medical, and here's the medical example that we often give. If we are screening for blood pressure and we have abnormally high blood pressure, we've got options. And we think through, we want to do the least restrictive option possible. If I go in, and typically when I'm going in and somebody takes my blood pressure, I'm probably already heightened because I'm nervous about heading to the doctor. I maybe have been running around, I haven't had much to eat, I've had too much coffee, whatever that might be, and my blood pressure might be high. So if it is high, hopefully they're not going straight to the left or open heart surgery. We just screened you quick and we're going straight to the most intense solution. We have to dial it back and say, okay, well, Megan, like, what's the context today? How are you feeling? Did you run up the stairs? Did you have too much coffee? Have you eaten? Are you nervous? Yep. Okay, well, I'm going to send you home with a blood pressure cuff and you're going to take your blood pressure once a week for the next month. And then tell us if there's a pattern or a theme. And if there is, then they might say, well, let's work on your diet, exercise, or sleep. That's going to be our first early intervention. Or if that's not working, then we move to medication. Then ultimately that level of triage and care gets more intense. But we want to start with really just screening. If my blood pressure was high, did I have to do anything about it? No, I could have just left it there. It's my choice. I'm in control of that. But I have information then to tell me there are some things that you could take to help get you the care that you might need and to get to a healthier state. So we want to use that analogy with our students and thinking through what data points do we have to proactively detect and screen how they're doing on that day-to-day basis. So we want to be able to use screening data, of course, academic, social, emotional screening data. We want to be able to use existing data in our system, such as attendance data, behavior referral data, grades. Maybe there's an opportunity for teachers to strategically nominate students. That's proactive detection, looking at our list of students and really then prioritizing care based on triage. What students have the most need and what are we able to serve? Who are we able to serve based on the capacity in our system? So let's define proactive detection. It means we're gathering information in order to activate the system. We need to be able to sit our teams of teachers down, or our grade level teams or departmental teams, whatever that looks like in your context, and gather information and look through it. The question is, who is gathering the proactive detection data? Is it a tier 2 team? Is it a tier 1 team? Is it grade level teams? Who's doing that? And then ultimately, what are we doing with that information? So now we have it. Where does that go? And how do we use it to inform the next step of our process? So our question for you is, what proactive data collection methods do you use or do you plan on using to make this work happen very strategically? Those are the things that we've mentioned in the chat. What do you already use? What data points do you consistently look at in your system to decide which students need the care and what level of care that they ultimately need? And then adding on, how about decision rules? How do we know? It's one thing to have a bunch of data coming together, but when we have that data, we need to know what to do with it. In our tier 2 solution, we really talk about making this happen first. We have to spend time really defining all of these rules and how we're collecting data and what our decision points are first before we enact it. We're preparing to do the work. And one of those really good preparation pieces is the decision rules. The data is there. Now, how many attendance referrals or behavior referrals or academic grades? What's our cut scores? What are our rules that we've established so we can make clear and rapid decisions when we come together and we don't sit there and spin and talk about the data versus doing something with the data? What's our timeline for review? We have data, we might have some decision rules. Now we have to decide, when are we actually collecting it in order to be able to enact the system and the process that we have started. Or in this case, you can look at the key, the more that purplish dot is monthly proactive data review. So we're looking at it real quick because we've made clear decision rules. We can collect our data in a quick and concise way. So we can do that monthly. And then maybe we have, universal screening touch points twice a year. And then we have another way for teachers to nominate students for additional care. And maybe those are another twice a year in between your structured universal screening times. This is where we want to get to with being able to proactively detect. We got to map it out and prepare our system to do the work, calendar it, create those decision rules so that we can then figure out what we're going to do next. We'd encourage you, if you haven't, to think through these 4 different lenses of decisions that you need to make. First one is, how do we go from tier 1 to tier 2? How do students, what's the fluid way that happens? How about tier 2 to tier 1? When students have been successful, how do we exit? Going from tier 2 to tier 3, what are our data points and our decisions around tier 2 to tier 3, and then from tier 1 to tier 3, because we know that is necessary for some students based on their need as well. One action item for you would be to, if this isn't solid in your system and you haven't spent the time, this is one way for you to make a really good, clear next step in this work, is creating your decision rules to drive your work. We also talk a lot about numbers that we need to know, because it's one thing to have our decision rules, yet we also need to know what is our capacity to serve the students. So let's just pretend we've engaged in that collection of data. So we have all of this data, and now we're figuring out how many students are looking like they have support needs. From that list, let's just say, for example, on the screen here, 22% of our student body looks like they have a need of additional care. Well, we have to then ask ourselves, how many staff, how many supports, how many people can we enlist in the actual interventions that we need to deliver to be able to meet the needs of those students? So that becomes then our capacity rate. What's our capacity to serve students? What percentage of students can we actually provide care for over time? And then we have a number there. So in this case, it's 12%. Well, then we have a gap of 10% of students. So then we need to triage and figure out, what then do we do with students who need support, but yet we can't all really care for them the way that we want to at the tier 2 level because we don't have the capacity to do it. So we have to triage which students, which of those 22% can we activate care for it at that tier 2 level, and which ones may benefit from additional tier 1 support. And that's what we call triage. It's that process of prioritizing that care based on the resources that we have. So your next kind of to-do from here would be, what's your triage process? Do you have a process that can answer these questions? What students from your list would benefit from an enhanced approach to tier 1? And what students may benefit the most from further defining a need and analyzing why that need exists? We talk about that as ruling in students for tier 2, or we rule them out because we believe that they could best benefit from an enhanced approach to tier 1. Here's a visual of how that might look. We have our data. And what is our data telling us? Well, if it's more than 15% of our school, if that's our capacity to be able to serve students, let's say it's 15%. If we have more than 15% of our students detected tier wide, we need to look at tier 1 implementation and enact our tier 1 team and look at data at tier 1 and really figure out, are we delivering tier 1 with fidelity? If it's more than 15% of a classroom is being detected as having higher levels of need, then we need to look at coaching and supporting that classroom educator to be able to deliver tier 1 in a more robust way. And then eventually, when we can get that number below 15% as combined, then we want to move down that route of tier 2 and tier 3 support.
Step 2, really, really important. Let's imagine we do the triage process Megan described. You actually have to spell that out. That needs to be a little protocol that gets followed, because just because you detect a need doesn't mean you're legally on the hook to deliver tier 2. Just like that medical example, if we did your blood pressure reading and your blood pressure was high, it doesn't mean we go straight to open heart surgery. We need to gather information because a tier 1 support may be a better solution than activating a tier 2 process. But now let's imagine we ruled the student in. The student's gone through a triage process and we say, yep, the student needs tier 2. Now we need to get good at analyzing, defining the need, analyzing why the need exists, and we better have a menu of supports, because we can't do precision intervention to target the root cause if we don't have a menu of options to select from. So we're going to go over this a little bit to understand the need, to define the need, but ultimately analyze why the need exists. We talk about form versus function. Form is the behaviors we see. Think about above the surface, the things that are observable to us. The function is the reason why we see those behaviors. We don't target interventions at the form of the behavior. We target interventions at the function. Why is it important to focus interventions on the function and not the form? If you can in the chat, what does this stir up for you when you're thinking about, okay, precision intervention means targeting interventions at the function, not the form, because there is no shin kicking intervention or F-bomb intervention. Name the behavior that could get in the way of self, others, or the learning environment. I like that. Band-aid versus root cause. Yeah, symptoms versus getting at the root cause for why we see the symptom. The behavior is the symptom. Yeah, you're trying to treat the reason for the behavior. Yeah. Form is, yeah, it's just it's an expression of communicating an underlying need. Ooh, that's just simple. The why, not the what. Behavior is just communicating. What is the student communicating to us? What is the reason why that need exists? So we're going to get into this process. It is what we call like a three-part step. We first have to define the need. We look at this as two things we need to define. We need to define the behaviors we need to decrease. The student is currently engaging in behaviors that are getting in the way of self, others, or the environment. That it's having a negative impact on self, others, and the environment. We also need to identify the behaviors that may not be occurring enough that we want to increase. These could be behaviors or skills. Why is that important? Because ultimately, that's what we're targeting to decrease and increase via our intervention, and ultimately what we're going to progress monitor. But that doesn't tell us what to do. The what will never tell us what to do. That's why we got to get at the why. And so that second part, that root cause analysis, why are those behaviors happening? Why do we see this need exist? This is where precision and effective intervention lives. We use what's called the acquisition performance paradigm. It's been researched since the 1970s. Actually, Albert Bandura, who created social learning theory back in the day, it was a really profound idea that we don't have to learn directly through our experiences. We can learn vicariously. And that's where modeling and different forms of teaching started to emerge, because we know the power of social learning. Another paradigm he developed was the acquisition performance paradigm. And he said, any human on the planet will struggle under one of two conditions. The first condition, if you're in an environment and you're expected to perform a skill you don't yet possess, but there's pressure on you to have that skill set, then you're going to struggle, because the environmental expectations and demand exceed your skills. That's called an acquisition need. We have students that don't necessarily have the emotion regulation skills to cope and manage emotions that come up in social and academic situations. And it results in behaviors that get in the way. That explains why we see the behaviors. Some students, the executive functioning needs they have, the environment demands for them executive functioning skills, and they don't yet possess the skills or have the tools to support their brains to stay focused, keep organized. That's an acquisition need. Performance need is the other way in which people will struggle. It's when people have the knowledge and skills, but they're not properly motivated or supported by the environment to consistently apply the knowledge and skills they possess. That's a performance need. That's a different type of support that we can target for the student. So we use this paradigm of acquisition and performance to really start moving down a path towards more precision interventions. But we have to have a menu of interventions. Why do we need a menu? Think about anywhere you go and you have different people going out to eat, going out to have happy hour, going out to do a variety of things. Why do we need a menu?
Because not every time does everybody want to eat the Brussels sprouts, Clay. Not every time. It's not, if I told everybody on this call, we're gonna have Brussels sprouts for dinner, I bet you some would say, no, thanks, I'm not coming along.
Pork chops, everybody, pork chops all around. Now imagine, this is the language we often think about. Students who have social, emotional, and behavioral needs are heterogeneous. That means there's different reasons that explain why they have that need. Even if the behavior looks the same, they may have different reasons why. And if we don't take that into account, what we end up doing is providing what we call mismatched interventions, imprecise interventions. And oftentimes educators are imprecisely delivering interventions because we don't have a process to get at the root cause and then select from among a menu of options what is the most precise and likely effective intervention that targets that root cause. Have to get really good at this. Now, our solution we've designed, there's two sets of menus. There's acquisition-based supports and performance-based supports. So if we have a process and we determine that the student has an acquisition-based need, then we got to figure out what specific skills does the student not yet possess that they need to be supported to learn and apply? We've identified kind of 3 groupings of skills, but there's 4 curricula in our solution. There's emotion regulation and coping for internalizing and externalizing emotions and behavior. We have relationship skills. That's more focused on teaching students social skills, establishing, maintaining relationships, resolving conflicts productively, being able to repair relationships. And then self-management, where students are supported to acquire knowledge and use tools to support executive functioning. So they're better able to meet task demands, to complete responsibilities more independently and on their own. So even within acquisition-based supports, we can get more precise by identifying the specific skills the student needs to learn and acquire. And then we have a menu of performance-based supports. So here's kind of how it looks when we boil down to the types of, or the menu of acquisition-based supports we need to have available. We know students, the reason why they struggle is they don't yet possess emotion regulation and coping skills. In the chat, can you put a 1 if you have students who struggle in school in response to challenging situations because they don't yet have emotion regulation coping skills to be able to meet those demands and challenges? So we know they exist in our schools. If you look at the science, every school has students, and the reason why they're struggling is they don't yet possess emotion regulation and coping skills. So as tier 2, we better have quality curriculum that can be delivered in small groups that teach students skills in this area. How many of you put a 1 if you have students who are struggling due to executive functioning? They have a hard time paying attention, following and remembering directions, staying focused, delaying gratification, controlling impulses. Now, how many of you on this webinar have those needs yourself? No, I'm just kidding. We could get a prevalence rate. I do. I know I do, especially in the executive functioning area. Now, what about social skills? How many of you have students? It's not because they don't have skills around emotion regulation. They're just rugged socially and can benefit from learning social competence skills to resolve conflicts, build and maintain relationships. So when we look really closely, we know we have students who need supports in these very precise areas. Roughly 40% of kids who struggle and have needs have acquisition needs. The other 60% have performance needs. We're talking students who possess the knowledge and skills. They just need supports in the environment that nudge, prompt, remind, motivate, reinforce, encourage them to consistently apply. Sometimes we know that adult attention is the motivator and behavior change mechanism. So guess what? For that student, check and check out is a perfect performance-based intervention because all we're doing is structuring adult attention on the front end and back end of each day. But there's a menu of evidence-based performance supports that we can precisely tailor based on what we believe, due to an information gathering process, what intervention has the motivational mechanism that's most likely to facilitate behavior change for the student because they possess the knowledge and skills. What we see, though, is people mismatch interventions. They deliver check-in, check-out for a student who has not yet acquired emotion regulation and coping skills. That's like using check-in, check-out to teach a student how to read. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't assign an adult mentor in the morning to encourage the kid to read throughout the day, meet at the end of the day and say, hey, did you read? When the kid doesn't know yet how to read. But we do the same thing if we're not careful. We meet in the morning with a kid who doesn't necessarily have the skills to manage their emotion. We encourage them to manage their emotions throughout the day. We meet at the end of the day with the student, say, hey, did you manage your emotions? And the kid's like, no, I don't have skills. So we need to get precise. We need to make sure that we know we can't motivate someone to do something they can't do because they don't possess their skills. That's when we need to provide acquisition interventions. On the converse, we shouldn't deliver acquisition interventions for students who already possess the knowledge and skills. We actually need to motivate them to now consistently apply the knowledge and skills they possess. I wanted to give you a little glimpse of what we offer in Character Strong Tier 2. All the interventions, we have what are called implementation scripts that really break down the intervention, outline how to implement each step of that. In addition to implementation scripts, we have fidelity rubrics for each of the interventions. And beyond that, we also have example kind of templates and resources to be able to customize the intervention to students that people can download and then use as they're delivering interventions. And what you're seeing here is for an intervention called ClassPass. And it's for students who are capable of doing academic work, but they typically escape or avoid or refuse doing the academic work. And so ClassPass is an intervention designed specifically for students with performance-based needs, and it increases their motivation to engage more consistently in the academic work that's in front of them.
Awesome. Make sure that you are dropping any questions that you have. That's kind of a big step, isn't it? Like, we got to figure out what exactly are the needs of the student. And then we need to collect data to make sure that we're getting information from everyone involved to figure it out, and then precisely pair them with a support. And then typically the struggle is we don't have the support available. We got to go look at a workbook. Maybe we're trying to Google stuff. We might have to develop a form, and then it just gets way burdensome and too cumbersome. And then we can't, as we said at the beginning, can't repeat it because it's not part of a very clear process that we can ultimately pull from, and a menu of supports. So let's move on to step 3. We have to then develop a plan, because what good is a goal without a plan? It's really great to have goals. No one says that that's a bad thing. We need to do those in life. Yet when we don't have a plan, a goal is just a wish. So we provide you really with understanding that tools, resources, they're needed, right? And the solution that we have with CST2 gives you all of these tools. But if you're going to work on it on your own, you know that you need to have tools to plan out the intervention. You've got to be able to monitor the progress. You have to track that intervention with fidelity to drive decisions. A lot of things have to come together in order to make this process work. And we're excited to just give you a few of those pieces. So with thinking through what is it that we have the capacity to do, going back to those numbers, and I saw something in the chat there, how do we develop our capacity rates? Well, we have to think through how many people or supports do you have in your system to actually deliver quality interventions and supports? Who's going to deliver acquisition? Who's going to deliver performance? And how many students can those people support over time? So this is just a list that you can think through. There's definitely more. This is not an inclusive list, but remember at the beginning, we talked about tier 2 being able to be delivered by anyone in your system. So we have to be able to train up our adults, our educators, to be able to help us with, let's just say, those performance interventions. Who can we enlist the support of to be mentors to help when we pair a student with check-in, check-out? Or if we pair a student with a behavior contract, who can set that student up for the day and be accessible to them to help encourage and motivate them and get them to use the skills that that their goal is set around? So who do you have available? And then who's going to lead it? You also need to think through, people need coaching. So if I'm going to be delivering some performance-based supports, I'm going to need some help in the classroom to remind me and encourage me to be able to do that over time, because stuff gets in the way. So who on a tier 2 team could help coach and lead that with the adult that's delivering the intervention? And then we have the groups that we need to deliver. Who can deliver groups? So going through capacity, you're going to figure out the percentage of students that can be served based off of the adults that can deliver those supports. And then we develop the plan. You need to have a form. You need to have a plan. Remember, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So you've got to figure out a tool, select a tool to be able to strategically write down what are the core components of an intervention that we need to be delivering well over time. In our solution, we've provided this really robust tool. It's called the Intervention Planning and Monitoring Form. It's basically an Excel sheet on steroids, if I can say, like, it's super robust that you can download into your system, and it loads the core components of the interventions that we have provided. It's those 10 interventions, the 4 acquisition and the 6 performance-based supports. It loads those core components so that we can assess whether or not we're delivering it. We can assign responsibility. We can say when that adult is supposed to be delivering that core component. And then we, at the end of the week, we can assess, did that get delivered to the student? And if not, we can go back and problem solve and provide coaching and support. Then we also need to figure out, how are we collecting baseline data? We defined a need and said we've got certain things that we want to increase or skills that we want to decrease. And now we have to go and collect the information. So we've got direct behavior ratings within our tool that will pop up and populate for you that you can use. You can go in there and you can look at that student. Is it frequency? Is it duration? Is it intensity of the behavior? And you can collect baseline data because those are all in here for you. And then we need to be able to define, when is the intervention starting, who's delivering the core components, who's collecting baseline data, who's collecting progress monitoring data. That's our plan. We've got to make sure that we address all of that so we can guarantee with as much success as possible that the student is getting what we intend them to get. We often skip that planning component, and it's hard. So if you have a plan that you've already used in the chat, we'd love to know. Or is this an area of growth for you? Developing a very clear plan. Who's responsible for what? Delivering the core components, collecting baseline data, progress monitoring is what we're going to get to next.
Developing a really good plan facilitates this next step. We're more likely to implement the intervention with fidelity. We've thought out, we have a rubric that allows us to gather fidelity data. So ultimately we can answer the question when it comes time to it. Did the student receive the intervention in a way that it's likely to be effective? We also need to have information at our fingertips around the student's progress in response to the intervention. We're really monitoring progress at 2 levels, the student level and the intervention level. And both pieces of information we need when it comes to step 5. We ultimately know that students can't benefit from interventions they don't receive. This is why, once we're in step 4, our main goal is to support fidelity of implementation. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that the student actually gets the intervention. Now, in the chat, how many of you have delivered intervention, but the student ultimately didn't receive the intervention with fidelity over time? Yet we're going to come together and make a decision that as to whether the kid got it or not, because we can visualize the progress monitoring data. But the first question we always need to ask is, did the student receive the intervention? So what we have available as part of CST2 and others, there's other systems to monitor the data and visualize it. It's really important not just to keep track of the progress monitoring data, but to visualize it, because the visual analysis of it enables rapid decision making. As you can see here, there's just tracking of progress monitoring data. There's a line that demarcates baseline from the intervention phase. You could see a goal line, which is that blue line with blue dots. And you can rapidly see that the student's behavior has improved to be commensurate with the goal line, in some cases above the goal line. So if we were to reconvene and meet as a team, we can look and make a decision very rapidly. In a high functioning tier 2 system of support, it often takes anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes per student to discuss when it comes time to reviewing data. We also need to be able to look at fidelity data. Now imagine these are the data that come out after implementing an intervention for 6 weeks. which core components, and I want you to further imagine that the student's response data, the student did not respond to the intervention. Which core components would you have an issue with that we'd want to hone in on? And the best decision may be not to say the student didn't respond to the intervention, but perhaps the best decision is to figure out how do we improve fidelity? And which core components would we hone in on? And it's pretty obvious when you go to the right here that components 3, 4, and 5, we would need to dig into. And what if those core components were what we call the active ingredients? Those were the main, most potent core components for the student to receive in order for the intervention to be effective. The decision wouldn't say, now bump up to tier 3 or special education referral. We would go back and we would want to figure out what got in the way of those core components, who was responsible, and how do we overcome some of the barriers.
I think this allows us to be able to have the conversations that really take any blame out of it, right? It's what did we say as the adults that we were going to deliver, and we just have to say, yep, the student got it or they didn't. It's not to anyone's fault, and we're going to come back and wrap around you and really get the implementation of that intervention right. But we don't have an opportunity to look at this data. We're not able to help our adults deliver as intended. So our last but not least is step 5. You can see that if we've done step 4 really well, when we come back together, we have our student progress monitoring data, we have our implementation data, and we can easily make a decision. We're not pulling things all together. We've got it right at our fingertips so that we can make a quick decision and get the student what they need. So your team would reconvene 4 to 6 weeks after you start the implementation of the intervention, review your progress monitoring data, review your fidelity data, and then you decide where that student needs care at the next level. So if we have a positive response to the intervention, we've got really good, adequate fidelity data, we're delivering it well, we're going to maintain it, or at some point we'll decide to start to fade that intervention. If the student is responding positively, but we didn't have the fidelity data that we needed to, it could have been a false positive, or we stick with it and we improve the fidelity to see if we can get an even greater positive response. If we don't have very good response, but yet we have adequate fidelity data, we might think about going back to step 2 and selecting a different intervention, really redefining the need and make sure that we've got the exact intervention that we think is going to be best. And sometimes we choose between 1 or 2 that we think could work, and we chose the one and we need to go back and choose the other. Or we could consider intensifying the support that the student is already receiving. If we've got inadequate fidelity and insufficient response, then we have to improve the fidelity of implementation first. We got to really hone in on the adult delivery and then come back with additional data points that are hopefully showing more adequate fidelity and students responding. But we should have a next step from this. We don't just sit there and say, okay, now what? We're going to maintain our exit, we're going to go back to tier 1. This one, we are going to do more work. We're going to implement with fidelity and really train and coach. Same thing here with our adults. And here we're going to go back and we might need to just reimagine what that support can look like with a different intervention, or if it's more intensified. But we know we need a team of people to do this. So in the chat, there's no successful implementation effort without a team that's accountable for implementation. Why is that? Some of you are here as maybe a school counselor, psychologist, behavioral interventionist, administrator. This is a lot. A coordinated 5-step problem-solving process can't be lifted up in isolation or by yourself. It can't rely just on one person. We have to have a team of people. Why is that? Why do we need a team of people wrapped around this work? Yeah, so it's such a great point. Can't be dependent upon a person, because people come and go out of systems, don't they? Yeah, and I love that, Jackie. You got to see the whole perspective of the child. When we get multiple minds coming together, we are so much greater than one alone. just what was said. No one person can do it alone. We can't tackle this work, even though it's a smaller subset of students. We need a lot of expertise and a lot of people supporting the work so that we can benefit as many students as possible. So if we're going to get teaming right, we got to get the right people in the right seats. Who's on our team? We have to meet consistently. We follow this 5-step structure problem-solving process. We use data to drive decisions, and we assess, how are we doing? Oftentimes we forget about assessing our own functioning as a team. So it's important for you to think through, are you effectively teaming around this work? Do you have a rubric, is the first question, to assess whether or not you're doing this work well? And if you are, fantastic. What are your ways to continually fine tune? If this is a pain point, we know that the work of implementing a robust process at tier 2 falls on the work of the educators that are coming together, that team. So we'd encourage you to look at, how are you teaming and what areas of growth do you have? So our solution, Clay, what's it all about?
Yeah, so we've been working a long time and pretty tirelessly to think about, how do we actually bring this all together? Because the typical return on investment is low. It's not that people aren't putting in time and energy. It's because of that scattershot approach. We need progress monitoring tools. We need screening tools to proactively detect. But then we need a process to get at the root cause. But then we need a menu of interventions. And beyond that, we need fidelity rubrics to track that. All that has to come together. And so what we've tried to do in Character Strong Tier 2 is bring it all together in one place. One easy to access place, the process, the teaming supports in terms of the guides for effective teaming, meeting agendas, video modules on roles and responsibilities, as well as the menu of both targeted curriculum that address students with acquisition needs, as well as targeted interventions for students with performance needs that are more designed to motivate. Last, what comes along with our solution, we know professional learning is essential. Ongoing, never-ending live professional learning comes with the purchase, the investment in the solution. So there's monthly live trainings, twice annually. There's deeper dive trainings that are more substantive and go deeper into the process and the supports. And then there's asynchronous modules that are more embedded in the platform, so people access professional learning in more bite-sized ways, that at the place where they need to access that information. What we've tried to do, with Character Strong Tier 2, we call it a solution, is bring all this together in one place for easy access.
So at the beginning, when we started, we asked you, what are your needs around tier 2? And you told us, here's those results. Clay, were you right? Yep, you were spot on. About 49% of you said we got a scattershot approach, and 33 said we're struggling to implement. So here's what we would love for you to do, or the 17% of you that are doing pretty good. Bring new nuggets back to your team. Well, first off, you might have decided, wow, I know more now than I did an hour ago, so I might change my score. So just give that context too. But you might need to bring nuggets back to your team that you learned today if you were a 1. If you said, well, we got a scattershot approach, we'd encourage you to download that MTSS guide that's been dropped in the chat. If you're really struggling to implement a coordinated problem-solving process, download our samples, attend one of our demos, and learn more about our solution and what it can do for you and your system. So we are going to start to address some Q&A here. We're going to just talk about some of our up-and-coming events quickly first. Right now, currently, the Whole Child Summit is going on. Videos will be available through the 7th. So if you haven't signed up, please do that. You can access those anytime that you want. Those are available for you, dropped every day. We've got a secondary curricula demo on the 29th. The 30th is a leadership. And then we've got a tier 2 demo on April 4th that you can sign up, or an elementary demo. We also are excited to encourage you to save the date, more details and registration coming soon, but we will be hosting a certification training. If you are in a leadership role around a robust approach to tier 2, we'll provide an opportunity for you to come to really an oasis place in Seattle and get the training that you need to bring this to life across your district or multiple buildings. So that's on the 25th and 26th, which is right before our national conference. Feel free to sign up for our awesome national conference, which is right down the street from Seattle. It's in Tacoma on the 28th and 29th. We'd love for you to just join us for a week in Washington if that destination sounds fun for you. So counselors, you can certainly attend. Absolutely. Let's look at your questions. What do we have here that we can answer for you as we start to wrap up? Are you able to share outcome data or information about schools that have successfully used our Tier 2 solution?
The Tier 2 solution is launched at the end of April. What we do have is data and evidence for all the parts. For example, validated screening instrument. That's like a piece of it. You need a validated screener. And then the next question would be like, do you have an evidence-based way to get at the root cause? And yes, we do. I've conducted research on using the acquisition performance paradigm and what happens when you use that paradigm to select interventions versus not using that paradigm. So we have evidence that results in superior outcomes to be able to get at the root cause and tailor interventions. We have evidence supporting the progress monitoring tools in terms of direct behavior ratings. And we have evidence of just the process in general. What happens when a team uses a Tier 2 problem-solving process, and that process alone leads to beneficial outcomes unto itself, above and beyond often the quality of the interventions, because people are convening together and engaging in problem solving versus problem admiration. And the focus is on using data to select intervention, using data to make decisions, and ultimately continuously improve to support the student.
Good question about teaming there from Jackie. When we think about a Tier 2 team, who does that all include? Academic, social, emotional, behavioral, larger group of intervention meeting quarterly. Yeah, we would encourage your Tier 2 team to include both academics and behavioral, as we know they are often commingled. We would encourage you to meet weekly, if not weekly, twice a month, to come make sure that we're staying on top of each student that is in this process. We've got agendas for you, function templates, calendar templates, things to support you with getting teaming right, which means you need to convene and you need to follow a process, which oftentimes that process that you follow inside of your meeting is reflected on your agenda. So we're setting that up for you to have success. All right, that's all of our questions, Clay. That was it.
All right, that's all you got?
That's it.
Come on, people.
It either means that
come on, throw us a random question.
People are overwhelmed or we did a really good job.
Yeah, we scared.
Which
I hope
one?
not.
Let's hope, well, hopefully it is the latter. Well, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes. We know we're a few minutes past the top of the hour, but happy to continue to engage in any questions that you have, or feel free to reach out, join a demo, download the samples. We are just typically a click or a Zoom away.
Sheree, we can share with you a couple of examples from other systems on the decision rules and how they kind of think about them. If you can just follow up and email us. Yeah, we're working on Tier 3. That's our next thing. Because at Character Strong, we really do view ourselves as partnering with schools to provide multi-tiered solutions, not just Tier 1 solutions, not just at Tier 2, but also working to create what we hope to be low burden, high impact Tier 3 solutions for students with more complex needs.
Yeah, Veronica, we can share with you a way to figure out your capacity rate if you send an email. We're happy to forward some resources along and questions that you want to answer.
Yeah, and we appreciate the questions because it does seem like fuzzy math. but we can, yeah, hopefully make it feel a little less fuzzy and more accurate.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great end to your week.